Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Tree Fund webinar series. We're excited to be back with a fantastic presentation for you today. We'll give folks just a couple minutes. I see everybody joining in. We're running a couple minutes behind schedule today. My sincerest apologies. As we just give everybody about a minute to join, go ahead and find the chat function and let us know where you're coming from. And a little tradition we do with our webinar series, and especially fun here on the Tree Fund webinar series, as we normally get people from all over. Here we come in fast, so fast I can't call them all out. I'm sorry. Oh my gosh, my eyes are spinning. Welcome everybody. Great to have you all
Um,
on. We have a good webinar today. We have 1,500 of you all registered. We're up to 800. So we'll go ahead and get started. I see most people are joining. My name is Bo Broadbeck. I'm with Auburn University, and we have the opportunity to serve as the host and moderator for the Tree Fund webinar series. It's a pleasure to be here today to have another great presentation in collaborating with Tree Fund. Joining us today, we have Megan Fielding, who is a new trustee with Tree Fund and also the Vice President of Sustainability. And she will be providing a little introduction to Tree Fund. So I'll turn it over to Megan.
Thank
well,
you.
I'll actually probably take over. Thank you, Bo. I'm Heath Hupke with Tree Fund. We just wanted to give you a brief introduction. Thank you all for attending again. As you start to pop in and say hello, let us know where you're from, and we want to also recognize our sponsors here that make today's webinar possible, and many of our research and programs. These are the leading donors that lead with their gifts and their times. But we have a great presentation today, so I want to continue and also recognize that we are celebrating this year in 2025 10 years of the Tree Fund webinar series. So whether this be your first time attending, or if you've miraculously been attending for 10 years, welcome. Thank you for your time, for your support, and for recognizing the impact that Tree Fund and our researchers have for our program, or for our community, and the work that you do every day. One just quick little fun and reminder of Tree Fund. What is Tree Fund? I think often, even in this title, we call this the Tree Fund webinar series. So I just wanted to send a reminder to everyone attending for their first or 100th time in learning about Tree Fund, that Tree Fund, tree stands for something. It stands for tree, research, and education endowment. We are the Tree Research and Education Endowment. That means that our goal is to support through endowment as a nonprofit, as a non-government organization, research and education in the arboricultural world. So we hope that you know of Tree Fund, but we want you to know a little bit more of who we are, and our true purpose is to provide this research and education to so many. And our Tree Fund webinar series is a highlight for myself and for many of you to be able to provide this free of opportunities. But there is cost, though, and we are a tax deductible nonprofit, non-government organization, and so any donations to Tree Fund help support programs like you're seeing today, and ongoing projects as we continue to build research opportunities, scholarships for incoming students to be able to get into the fields and make things possible for our future. So please, if you have time throughout this presentation or later to consider donating to Tree Fund, we greatly appreciate it. Many of you are probably here as well to receive some CEUs. So you do not need to put in the chat your CEU or your ISA information when you registered for this webinar. All of that information is gathered on there, and then we as Tree Fund will be submitting that information to you. And as you can see, you may see, we have over 900 people right now attending. So if we have 800 CEUs that we are submitting, it will take ISA quite a while to get that completed. For those that attended March, those have all been submitted, but I think ISA is still working on that over 800 list. And so when we do get that confirmation that that's been put into your account, we will send an email saying that that the webinar and your CEUs have been recorded appropriately. If you're looking for a certification of attendance, please email that to education@treefund.org. And we have a few upcoming webinars scheduled, and the registration is available. Our next one will be Tuesday, May 6th, 2025. Again, it's going to be a Tuesday around this time, at that time. So we are working on a summer tree equity panel discussion. And then in October, we have policy strategies to value and retain mature urban trees on private lands. So that registration is also open and available if you'd like to get that on your calendar. Next, I am happy to introduce Megan Fielding. She is the Vice President of Sustainability with Asplin. Megan leads the corporate sustainability, including environmental, social, and governance initiatives, and works closely with external partners to deepen Asplin's commitment to the local communities. She has decades of expertise in financial services and responsible for investing as she collaborates with teams across the organization, including operations, fleet, procurement, and legal to integrate sustainability principles into business operations and decision-making processes. Megan holds her MA in International Studies from the University of San Francisco, BA in Economics from Wheaton College, and Certificate in Sustainability Leadership from Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. And Megan is also in her first year as a Board of Trustees with Tree Fund. So thank you, Megan, for helping us out today.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone on the call. Really impressive turnout. Thank you all for making the time. Real brief in terms of the connection between the Tree Fund and our speaker today. So the Tree Fund, in addition to all the wonderful things that Heath detailed for you, the Tree Fund also facilitates the research funding to Penn State. For now, this research project has been going on for over 70 years that Dr. Carolyn Mahan is now leading, and she'll be speaking to us today about some really interesting and exciting findings and ongoing research. But behind the scenes, it takes a lot, as we say, it takes a village to make things come to life. So First Energy and PICO are utilities that help to fund this research, along with Corteva and the company that I so proudly work for, Asplin Tree Expert. So we've been involved since the beginning. It's something that really excites us to better understand the research that takes place, the discoveries, and just, to be able to provide this to the industry as well as to the local communities means everything to us. So, so let me introduce Carolyn. Dr. Carolyn Mahan is professor of biology and environmental studies at Penn State. She holds a PhD in wildlife science, also from Penn State, and a BS in natural resource management engineering from the University of Connecticut. Her research interests include effects of human-modified landscapes on wildlife and the behavioral ecology of mammals. She's published a whole lot, as you might already know, but some of her publications include the Conservation Biology, Journal of Mammalogy, and the PLOS One, among others. She serves on the boards of Pennsylvania Wildlife Society, the Pennsylvania Center for Private Forests, and is the past president of the Pennsylvania Biological Survey. And she currently serves on Governor Shapiro's Advisory Council for Conservation here in the state of Pennsylvania. So on behalf of everyone, Carolyn, thank you so much for joining us today. We're really excited to listen to what you're going to share today. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. And thank you, Heath. Everyone can hear me. I'm going to allow Heath to kind of monitor the chat. And so what I've done with the talk today is I think the talk will probably be, I don't know, maybe 25 minutes long, give or take. And then I really like to have back and forth questions with you. So I'm going to kind of change you should be able to see my screen. I'm going to minimize myself. Say, okay, here.
Dr. Mahan, your screen's not shared at the moment.
Oh, it's not. Okay, okay. All right. I feel like I'm back in the classroom.
And while you're doing
Make,
that, we will just remind everybody that we do have a Q&A portion that you should be
good.
able to use. So please, as Carolyn just said, please put your questions in there, and then towards the end of her presentation, we will help guide those questions. Thank you.
Okay. How does that look, Heath? Does everything look better now?
Perfect. Yep.
Okay, okay. So today I want to minimize this. This is going to go away. Do you guys see what I'm talking about? Um, oh gosh. So I will explain this to you. I am on, there we go. Okay. So I'm on medical leave this semester. So I am home because I had major foot surgery, not to go into too much details, but I'm usually good at this because I teach online sometimes, but it's been a little while, so I'm a little bit rusty. But let me just start. What you're seeing on this front page, this first slide that I'm showing you, is a website. And so this website, sites.psu.edu with transmission line ecology, has all of the information you're going to see today. You can look at documents and reports that we provided for our research, publications, key research findings, the history. All of our partners are listed here. So please go to that site, write it down. Actually, if you just even go into Google and you write transmission line ecology into Google, our site is usually the first one that comes up. So everything is there. You don't have to be taking notes or anything today. I just want to kind of go over our findings with you. I also have put my email here. And if you have any questions about the research that you'd like to talk to me about in more detail, please email me. Sometimes after I give these webinars, I do follow-up Zoom meetings with people, so I'm happy to do that. I also want to say I noticed that there's people on this webinar from all around the world. Our work is focused on the northeastern portion of the United States, but I do think it has a lot of relevance to work on transmission lines and on rights of ways in general. Okay, so again, big definition here, but I do want to just mention a few of these terms that are on the page. And I see, so again, with the chat and all of that, as I said, I'm just going to have Heath monitor that. But anyway, so some of the terms that you're going to see me use today: integrated vegetation management. Many of you have heard that before. In fact, many of you on this presentation today might have heard me speak before. But this is the practice of promoting and creating desirable, stable, low-growing plant communities that resist invasion by tall, growing trees. Now, keep in mind, our research is on transmission lines. Okay, so these are transmission lines delivering electricity. The primary responsibility is to deliver electricity reliably and safely. So you can't have large overstory trees growing in these transmission line corridors. So we're trying to create habitat that is low growing, preferably composed of native plants, and that won't interfere with the transmission of electricity. The way that this is done, the way that this landscape is managed, is through a variety of approaches. One is selective use of herbicides. You also could mow it, right? You could mow it. You could hand cut it. You could even, in theory, spray herbicides non-selectively. But integrated vegetation management is selective. And what you want to do is sort of arrest what we call ecological succession. So you have a low growing habitat. And so what we've done at State Game Lands 33, where this research is located, is there has been partnerships over the last 70 plus years now to study how is the best way to do this. And you want to look at those two competing ideas: reliability, safety, but also we're working in a natural habitat. So can you do that? Can you provide reliable electricity safely and also manage for diverse native wild communities? What I'm showing you in this slide is a picture of a portion of State Game Lands 33. And one of the things I want to point out here in this picture, and we'll talk about it more as we go through the talk today, is what we call the wire border zone method. You can see directly under the wires, the vegetation is much shorter than the vegetation on either side. And then in this particular site, the vegetation then gradually gets higher as it transitions into the surrounding forest. This particular site, State Game Lands 33, is on state game lands, which are public lands that are set aside primarily with hunters' license fees. So these are landscapes that are used by hunters, but also hikers and other outdoor enthusiasts. So we will see that in our research, this wire border zone is important for promoting biodiversity on the landscape, while also managing for reliable electricity delivery. So for those of you who are not from the Northeast, the research that I'm focusing on today is State Game Lands 33, located in the central portion of Pennsylvania. This is in a forested landscape, part of the Appalachian Mountains of the eastern United States. And what you're seeing here is just a series of different types of organisms that have been studied on this landscape. Since 1953, vegetation has always been studied. The research team has always looked at vegetation. So we have a very long-term data set of vegetation. Also in the 1950s, a lot of the early research was focused on animals that hunters pursue, like white-tailed deer and rabbits and wild turkeys. And that early research in the 1950s and the 1960s indicated that these rights-of-way are really great habitat for huntable species. As we started to move into the 80s, we started to ask the question, well, what other species are using these rights-of-ways? What kind of non-game birds are using them? And so since the 80s, we have studied mammals, small mammals, birds, herpetofauna, which are things like salamanders, snakes, toads, frogs. We've studied butterflies. In the 2016, we did a really intensive work looking at native pollinators, in particular native bees. And then in the last few years, we've studied ground beetles. And I'll explain why we've chosen these organisms to study as we move through the talk. I've also noticed, as some of your names were coming in today, that many of you are from more urban environments or urban foresters. We do have another study site near Philadelphia. This is called the Green Lane Research Area. The Green Lane Research Area is interesting because it's not really in this forested landscape. It's in a landscape that is more of a suburban landscape. It's in some ways, it's difficult to compare directly the results of the two areas, because when you have these urban landscapes, these suburban landscapes, you start to see the effects, stronger effects of non-native species. So I'm not going to be spending that much time on the Green Lane area, but I do want to say, for those of you on this call that are more interested in what's happening in urban environments, suburban environments, you can email me directly or go to that website, and you're looking for information from Green Lane that will inform some of the work that you're potentially doing in more urban landscapes. This last summer, I wrote down here, 2023, we have repeated some of the lepidopteran surveys that's looking at native butterflies, and those data are being sorted right now. Okay. All right. So again, all the pictures that you see today are from research that was conducted at State Game Lands 33 while I was the principal investigator. I've been in charge of the project for about 10 years. So in 2014, I came on as the principal investigator. And I've taken over for a long line of professors that have studied on this study site. And I'm very excited to be involved. And at the end of the presentation, I'll show you a picture of how I actually got started on this project back when I was in graduate school. Right now, again, it's like now we're 70 years plus, but some of the things we'll talk about today are native plant communities, native bees, bird communities. We have a lot of data on bird communities, native bird, breeding birds, and ground beetles. This particular slide demonstrates that this is not just it's not just a simple study area. We're dealing with about 2 to 3 miles worth of right-of-way under this transmission line. And what's been great about the research partners that we have on this project is that we, as researchers, university researchers, we have been permitted to take an experimental approach at State Game Lands 33 and also at Green Lane. And what I want to focus on right now when you're looking at this slide is this middle column. And what you're seeing here are the different treatments that we are studying. We have 2 sites. Each site's about 2 to 3 hectares and 2 to 3 acres in size. 2 of our sites are mowing only. So if you see a site that says mowing, herbicides have never been applied at that site. So from the 1950s on, those sites have been mowed. These sites, we also have hand cutting sites. So those have been hand cut. When I say hand cut, I don't mean we're going out with hand saws. They use chainsaws to cut the vegetation down. But again, no herbicides used in those sites. Then you start to see a variety of different treatments here in the middle. You start to see sites where we have selective application of herbicides, and you see different types of herbicides used, right? Glyphosate, triclopyr. So you see different types, different combinations of herbicides used. We also have broadcast application sites. Okay, not that I would recommend broadcast application as the best way to manage these sites, but that is a technique that's used. And so we want to see what the effect of those sorts of techniques have on the diversity. So we have broadcast, we have selective, we have hand cutting, and we have mowing. And when I go back to that term, integrated vegetation management in our site is really this selective application of herbicides. And you can picture going out to a site, having a backpack sprayer on, and only applying herbicide to plants that are not compatible with transmission lines. So for example, you would want to remove a large oak species like red oak. You'd want to remove that from the transmission line corridor. Versus broadcast, you would just spray non-selectively. That would not necessarily be a type of integrated vegetation management. Okay, so that's the different types of treatment. So that's great. We have replication for our studies, and we've had that now for like 70 years. But the other thing that this slide shows you is it shows you that when you use some of these non-herbicide techniques, mowing and hand cutting in particular, you see really high stem growth, woody stem growth. So what you're seeing here with these numbers is the number of trees per hectare. These are stems of trees that are not compatible with transmission lines. So stems of red oak, I keep giving that example, or red maple, that if left alone would grow up and reach the canopy. So you can see that when you don't use herbicides at all over this long period of time, the stem counts for these non-compatible trees really go up. This one broadcast site too, I do think it's a little bit of an abnormality. This one broadcast site has a lot of stems as well. But then you have some of these other sites. This broadcast site had none the year that we took this particular data. In general, though, when we look at the data, the sites where we use the selective application of herbicide, we are able to best control the non-compatible species of trees. And as we move into now, I'm going to talk about the response to this management. One thing I do want you guys to know as you're listening to this is I do not do the management. That is not something that the research team does at Penn State. What we do as researchers is we study the response to the management. So we go out, we work really closely with our partners and we understand the treatment that has been applied. Usually once every 4 to 5 years is this area is treated. So we know what the treatment was, and then we measure the response. Okay, and so I'm going to start today with the response of shrubs and native plants to this different types of treatment. So I'm going to be what I'm focusing on with the plants is I'm focusing on sites where integrated vegetation management is used, where selective application of herbicide is used. And what you can see when the application of herbicide is very selective, if you leave compatible shrubs alone, you can start to develop this compatible shrub community. And I hope you can see that this compatible shrub community can also act as a biological suppressant to overstory trees. And in northeastern Pennsylvania, one of the most common shrubs that we see at our study site is mountain laurel, which also happens to be our state flower here in Pennsylvania. So mountain laurel, here we have vaccinium. This is an example of or low bush blueberry. Huckleberries they're all types of vaccinium. A fire cherry, rubus, blackberries, meadow sweet, and wild azalea are all common shrubs that if you are spraying selectively, you can leave them alone, allow them to spread over the landscape, suppress the overstory trees, and then you get this stable shrub community. I hope you're also noticing something else with these shrubs. They are flowering shrubs. So they provide important nectar sources for pollinators and butterflies, and also nesting structure for native birds. Also on these sites, if you're doing selective integrated vegetation management, you can promote blooming forb species. These are species that die back every winter, but then come back and bloom the following year. Just some of the examples, these are all, again, pictures from our study sites. Common milkweed, which is important in North America now for the recovery of the monarch butterfly. Wood lily. This species here, this yellow species, is a yellow loosestrife, which is important for a particular group of bees. Goldenrod, which blooms in the fall and creates these carpets of flowers in the fall, often in conjunction with a plant called an aster. We also have dogbane. This is also called wild hemp. It has an obligate species of beetle associated with it, a beautiful species of beetle, the dogbane beetle, and other species like yarrow. So these are all flowering plants as well that are important for our native pollinators. This work has been published. It was published in 2020 with some of our most recent data. And really what we see, I actually don't even know how much more I can publish on the plant data, because the plant data at State Game Lands 33 has been published for so long. And every time it's published, we keep showing the same thing over and over and over again. Selective use of herbicides promotes native plants, suppresses non-compatible species of trees, and then in turn supports these other animal communities. It's almost like I can't, because people have said, are you going to publish more? I'm like, well, the data just keeps saying the same thing. And it just is continually being supported by the data that integrated vegetation management promotes native plant species communities. All right, so with that, we're going to move on to some of the animals that we have studied. And I want to really focus here on the migratory birds. So there's a group of birds that spend their winters down in the tropics, and they come up every spring into the Appalachian Mountains to breed. These are called neotropical migrants. Most of them are in trouble in the United States. They are declining in the United States. And in particular, there are some types of neotropical migrants that really like to nest in shrubby species, like I showed you in some of those previous slides. And so this is early successional. You could think of them as shrub breeding species are declining in the Northeast. Many of these are conservation concerns. For example, the Audubon Society keeps a watch list that documents the decline of these species, and they are all declining throughout the Northeast. Research on these species of birds started in 1982 at State Game Lands 33, and I'm just going to cut to the chase right here. One of the things that's really interesting about State Game Lands 33 is that when you look at the Appalachians as an aggregate, these species of birds are declining. But when we look at the data on State Game Lands 33, are all the way back to 1982, these species of birds are stable. So we know this habitat management, this integrated vegetation management, is aiding in the conservation of these species of birds. And one of the objectives of our research project the next 3 years is to look at this long-term data set from 1982 to the present and publish this fact that even though breeding birds are declining throughout the Appalachians, especially these shrub species, the management, the integrated vegetation management at our study site is keeping those species stable. Some of these species, field sparrow, eastern towhee, chestnut-sided warbler, common yellowthroats, prairie warblers. Prairie warblers are not found at State Game Lands 33, but they're really common at that Green Lane site down by Philadelphia, that more suburban site. The other thing that we see in our study areas is that we have a really good success rate of nests. One thing as ecologists that we get concerned about is you want to make sure that as an ecologist, you don't create habitat that attracts birds, and then they go to the habitat and they try to breed, and then predators come in and destroy all of their nests. That would be called an ecological trap. So we don't just go out there and say, oh yes, we hear a chestnut-sided warbler singing. We don't just do that. We actually find their nest. We follow the nest through time. We make sure the babies are hatched and fledged from the nest, and that's how you measure nesting success. So you can see we have 40 to 68% success rate of nests. About a normal success rate for nests is about 40%. So in fact, in many of our sites, it's even higher than the average that you would find in the Appalachian Mountains. And that work was published in 2022. Oh, my picture of my towhee covers it up. But 2022 in the American Medical Naturalist, that paper is cited again on that website. Okay, so birds are doing great. Really happy with how birds not only are doing well, but are consistently doing well for the past, 40 years on State Game Lands 33. So when I took over the project, we decided we were going to keep plants going, birds going, but then we decided to kind of move into a whole new phase of the project, focusing on insects. And the first group that we focused on were pollinators. And that's because we ecologists are alarmed at the decline of pollinators in our landscapes. And we're not completely sure what the decline is due to. People will often say, oh, it's because of the use of pesticides. But actually, we know from research that when you look at the active ingredient, for example, in herbicides, that is not toxic to bees. One of the things could actually be the surfactants that people use, the oils. They might cause harm to bees, but not the actual chemical that's used in the herbicide. But we're trying to understand what's happening. So we decided to, with our research partners, to examine the native bee communities at State Game Lands 33, and as you can see by the slide, and Green Lane. So over the course of 2 summers, we collected almost 3,000 individual that represented 156 unique taxa. You can think of them as species. Many of these species, we turned out, once we identified them, are rare or vulnerable species. We also documented species that had never been documented in the state before. And all of these species were native species with the exception of the European honeybee. When you looked at selective herbicide application, or what we're using in the integrated vegetation management, that had the greatest richness of bees. So the number of species of different types of bees was highest where selective herbicide was applied. Just some examples, and one of the reasons I like to point this out on this slide is that not only are we learning about management and its effects on wildlife, on rights of ways, we are also doing some really great, just pure science at State Game Lands 33. The species here, Herates, this is a new Pennsylvania record, never been documented in the state of Pennsylvania before. Macropus, which is found here in the middle. This is dependent on a plant that I showed you earlier, the yellow loosestrife, and it's a really interesting bee. It collects oil from the loosestrife and provisions its young with that oil. And we also documented Bombus fervidus. This is the golden bumblebee. And this species, some of the international communities that study pollinators predict this particular species of bumblebee may become extinct in the next 60 years. So these are species that are doing quite well. We're finding them on the right-of-way. And in fact, we are also studying a new species to science, Nomada, which is a species of bee that we found. We could not identify it. And we reached out to the pollinator community of entomologists, and we are pretty sure, we're having some genetic tests done to confirm it, that it's a whole new species that has been discovered on State Game Lands 33. So great habitat being provided under these transmission lines. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. This is in that PLOS One paper on pollinator diversity, but I do want to draw your focus to this particular slide. Okay, the slide here on the right is just looking at bee abundance. How many bees? When you talk about bee abundance, we're not talking about the different species. It's just, was there a bee or wasn't there a bee? So that's abundance. But I do want you to take a look here on the left slide, because what you're seeing here, we call these rare fraction curves, and we're looking at species diversity. So this takes into account the different types of bees we found, as well as their abundance. And if you look here at the bottom, HVF means high volume foliar. That's the pink line. You can think about that almost as a non-selective application. Low volume basal is when you just apply herbicide selectively to the woody portion of the plant that you don't want. And then low volume foliar, you're still just applying the vegetation very selectively, but you're applying it to the entire plant, not just cutting and squirting. When you look at the bees, and when you just look at species richness, low volume foliar across all measures of diversity provides the highest number of different species. High volume foliar is not that different. However, it's not that different, but it does have a problem with total abundance. So really, if you are selective in your use of herbicides, that is the takeaway from this paper, that it promotes the highest number of native plants. In turn, it's supporting the highest number of richness and diversity of native bees. Okay, so that's the pollinator work, and that's also available through publication. This last piece I'm going to talk to you about has not been published. We're working on a paper right now. We should be submitting it. I've given my co-authors till the middle of May to get it submitted. And so this is some work we're doing on ground beetles. And one of the reasons we're looking at ground beetles is because I have given these talks not just to people like you, but we give them at ecology meetings and entomological meetings. And you have ecologists raise their hand and they'll say, okay, well, the bees don't seem to be negatively affected by this use of selective herbicide every 4 to 5 years. The bees seem to be doing fine. But you'll have ecologists ask the question, well, maybe though the herbicides are accumulating in the ground. Maybe they're accumulating in the ground and you have insects that are doing horribly and you don't even know it. So we said, okay, well, what we'll do is we will go and we will sample ground beetles. And ground beetles have been used as bioindicators, indicators of biological health for decades. They've been primarily studied in agricultural systems, but they also are really good indicators because they are top of the food chain organisms. Okay, they're mostly predatory organisms. So they're ecologically important. They're found in all sorts of habitats. They're beneficial insects. They also can bioaccumulate because for an insect, they live for a pretty long time. So if herbicides are going to be accumulating in the landscape, you would probably see a decline in these different types of beetles. So these data, we still have to, we have to kind of aggregate the data, but I do want to point out some interesting findings. What you're seeing, if we just look at, it doesn't really matter what year we look at. These are just different types of diversity indices, different types of ways that you would measure the numbers of different beetles. What you are seeing are the different treatments along this lower axis. So we have sites where it's just been mowed, high volume foliar, 2 different treatments. So that's where a lot of the site was applied with non-selective application of herbicides. Then you have low volume foliar, again, it's selective treatment, low volume basal, selective treatment, and hand cut only. So what you basically see when you look across here is you really statistically, you don't see a difference. In fact, the hand cut sites where we don't ever have used herbicides tend to have slightly lower diversity or evenness. Okay, so one thing that we do though that we focus on that we like to see here is low volume basal. I'm circling it here. I also am circling it here with this Shannon's diversity. Again, just a different index of diversity. Low volume basal, again, that's really selective. We seem to see the highest number of different types of beetles. This is not statistically different. So basically what we can see is the use of integrated vegetation management is compatible with beetle diversity in the ground, with ground beetle diversity. We do not see numbers drop off in sites where herbicides are used to manage vegetation. Okay, so what we've learned with the herbicide, presence and absence of herbicides do not explain differences in ground beetle communities or mowing versus hand cut. You know, we all see the same, no statistical difference despite the type of treatment that is being used. So as we close up here and I get to questions, I see questions coming in. I do want to just say another really big shout out to our research partners and how the data that we're collecting is being used to inform management, but it's also being used in a much larger sense. There's the U.S. Geological Survey. They run what's called the national, and it's really an international bee lab where they document the occurrence of native pollinators. And because of the research that we're doing, they are also now documenting the occurrence of ground beetles. Because if we don't know the current number of beetles or bees on the landscape, how will we know if they're declining or by what amount they're declining? So the data, all the animals that we collect, the bees and the beetles, they are curated at Penn State's Frost Entomological Museum. And all of those data are shared with these federal databases, which are shared internationally, so we can keep a handle on how these organisms are doing globally. All right, so this is, again, how I finish up today. The work really comes down to people and our partners, and I alluded to this earlier. That's me. I think I was maybe 22 or 23 there. And this is Dr. Bramble. He was 2 researchers ago. In the summer, my research for my PhD was on chipmunks. It was not on transmission lines, but in the summers, I helped my advisor, Dr. Yonner, with some of this work at State Game Lands 33. And here I am showing Dr. Bramble a towhee nest that we had found. Okay, so back then, you know, so the towhees that we're studying today are probably the great, 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 great grandchildren of the towhees that we were studying back in the early 1990s. We have a great research team. Many of the faces in this picture have changed, but the major players are the same. Our partners are Asplunk, First Energy, PICO, Corteva Agriscience, Tree Fund, the Game Commission, who owns the land on which the right-of-way traverses and Penn State. So long-term research permits exploring biodiversity responses, and we can study these as these integrated vegetation management methods change over time. Even the herbicides that you're using today are much different than the herbicides that were used in the 1950s. So we can see these changes over time. One of the goals is, for me as a researcher, is to produce robust publishable results, because I want this work to stand up to the scientific community as well as the practitioner community. And this is my last slide again, just to put this up for you. Again, our website, you don't have to even write this down. I said, if you Google transmission line ecology, our site at Penn State will come out. And I also want to give a shout out. I haven't read the paper yet, but in late 2024, December 2024, some interesting work has come out in the southeastern United States that was funded in part by Duke Energy, where researchers, I believe it was Louisiana State University, I think that was the organ. They found very similar findings in the Southeast, where integrated vegetation management was compatible with promoting native bee communities. So that work is out there as well. Okay, so with that, I will take questions, and I guess I will let Bo or Heath or whoever's going to moderate the questions. I think that would probably be the best way to do it.
Dr. Mahan, thank you for, I'll go ahead and start it off. Thank you for
Okay.
a great session. And it's great to always see how this work progresses. I know we had you on here a few years back and just kind of see the progression of this research that's been going on for decades. Thank you very much. We do have
You're welcome.
questions.
Okay.
In the we asked people to put them in the Q&A. So if any of y'all have questions, we won't have time to get to all of them. But there's one here from Jill Vig, and she writes, how far from the utility lines do you maintain lower vegetation? She writes, here in Southern California, SCE is saying minimum of 12 to 16 feet, even in urban settings.
Okay. So so Jill, that's a great question. As I said, I don't do the management. But I will tell you this. There was an issue with federal regulations. I'm going to say, I think it was in 2016 or 2018, where some of our border zones were considered too close to the transmission line. And Asplunk came in and was managing on behalf of First Energy, and they did cut back those border zones. So they had to cut the border zones back, and I was really concerned that those border zones would be very, very narrow and would affect biodiversity. And so in some sites, the borders, I just want to focus on the borders, not how far away they were from the transmission line, but the borders were so narrow that they might have gone down to maybe 10 feet wide. A 10-foot wide border zone, though, was still so much better than no border zone. And what I didn't present here today is we added some study sites where we had absolutely no border zone along the forest, where Asplunk had been asked to clear all the way to the forest for those clearances. And even a very narrow border zone, we had significantly higher numbers of breeding birds and a much higher success of breeding bird nesting. So narrow border zones are important. Every site we follow, the people that are managing the site for us, they follow all of the federal guidelines for setbacks, and they are monitoring those transmission lines all the time. So if you're following federal standards there in California, we are following federal standards in Pennsylvania as well.
Thank you. I'll jump into the next question. Kevin asked, with herbicide applications, are you finding decreased efficacy of herbicides over such long periods of routine application? Is the resistance experienced of any consideration given to rotating more mode of action?
Yeah, yes, I will say that again. These are great questions. I don't do the monitoring on that side, but I will say that different types of herbicides have been applied over the years, as you can imagine, right? From 1953 to now. So there are when I look at what has been applied, the mixtures that are used are different. And so, they do surveys. So for example, if you have a mixture you want to affect legumes like our locust trees, you might use a different mixture of herbicides. One of the things, or you might use an herbicide that leaves a residual or a non-residual herbicide. So those are used. There are different mixtures used. But one of the things that I think is interesting with the herbicide application in this setting is that once you achieve that stabilized early successional habitat, you don't really need to apply that much herbicide. And you can go back in that plant paper I cite, and you can actually see, like, the pints of herbicide that are applied. And again, right, there's mode of action too. They apply it with water, whatever. But because you're only applying the herbicide once every 4 to 5 years and in such low amounts, I have not seen it not be effective in the 10 years but I've only gone through 2 cycles. So I think it's a little bit of a different question than you might ask in a agricultural setting where you might be applying weed control multiple times a month. So I haven't seen it. I do know that we're using different formulations because some people, herbicides cost money. So the least amount of herbicide you can use is probably the better for your bottom line. And once you get that stabilized early successional community, you don't really need to use that much.
Thank you. There was somebody else here that asked a question. If you could quickly define the difference between selective versus broadcast herbicide.
Okay. Yeah. So broadcast would be if you went through, like if you're going through an area, trees are growing, and you are just going to spray everything. You're going to spray everything. You're not going to pay attention to what the plants are. You're just going to spray everything to knock the trees, to kill the trees that are getting too high. So you don't just spray the tree, you spray the whole area. And those are like our high volume, and you might use water, as your base to spread the herbicide around. You don't have to have people in backpacks go in, right? You don't have to have a lot of training either because you're just spraying everything. But we do know that as herbicide, the amount of herbicide, it's not like I get concerned because sometimes I give this talk and people come up and they're like, oh, herbicides are good for bees. Like I can't ever say herbicides are good for bees. Selective application of herbicides are compatible with bees. So broadcast spraying, and sometimes you see PennDOT. I know PennDOT or Department of Transportations will do this because you can just take a truck down the road and just spray an herbicide to knock back the vegetation. It's not selective. You're not selectively removing just a species that you do not want on the landscape. So that's what's happening there. When you use herbicides selectively, what does happen though is you need to have greater knowledge of the plant community because you can't just send anyone out. Like if you're sending someone out on a mower or on a broadcast application of herbicide, they don't have to know the different types of plants. You're just cutting them down or getting rid of them. When you're doing selective application, you need to do more training, and you need to have people be able to identify what plants stay and what plants go.
Thank you. And this question, well, I'll throw it out there. It says, does the research compare forests with the same tree species type, or is there any sort of control differences based on forest tree species composition? And they write a kind of an explanation. For the anomaly of the broadcast treatment yielding a high stem count, I'm wondering if the forest composition was mostly of a weedy tree species like trembling aspen or Manitoba maple.
Yeah, I can see what you're asking there. Yeah. That particular site, that's a great question. I should go back and look at what those stems are. I should really go look at what those stems are. We don't have aspen there, but what we do sometimes get is we'll get these clumps of like red maple that will come in and will kind of dominate an area as it's growing in. So that could have been something like that where we came into an area where we had just a lot of red maple generation that year. And so when we got rid of it, the question is for me is I have to look at the data is that red maple, if there was all those stems, because it was in a site, an herbicide site, we would have herbicided it. And then the question is, did it come back? Because one of the things that we see that's really interesting because of this long-term data that we don't see a lot in other studies, because long-term ecological studies are kind of rare, is we do see this cycling. For example, we've seen hay-scented ferns come and go. They'll come in, they'll spread the area out, but then 5 years later, the rubus or the blackberry comes in and it kind of chokes out the ferns. So that particular site might have been an abnormality of that particular sampling period, that 5 year period. And that's something we haven't done. You know, we know anecdotally that we see this cyclical nature, but we really haven't tracked a site through time as far as the plants go. But that's a great question. One thing that I do know as far as with the species composition is I had a forester look at the data. What seems to be driving whether or not you have red maple on a site or oak coming in on a site as far as the overstory trees, aspect seems to be more important and slope. So which position, which way is the right of way facing? And we tend to see some differences there.
Thank you, Dr. Mahan. Let me see here. I'm scrolling down. There's some somebody writes, since selective herbicide applications seem to have the most successful rates in regards to biodiversity of pollinators, is there a reason why some sites are having broad herbicide applications? Is there beneficial reasons to perform non-selective herbicide applications, i.e. high number of invasives, etc.?
Yes, yes. Bo, whoever asked that, great question.
It was Ethan.
Ethan, great question. Yes. What I want to say is, so when we look at this particular study, this state game land site is a beautiful site. It goes through Appalachian mountain forests, public land. There are other sites like that Green Lane site I mentioned near Philly, where we're starting to see invasive species come in at a very high rate. So integrated vegetation management is really important for removing non-compatible tree species, but I also see it being really important ecologically as a way to remove non-native plants. So if you work closely with the people who are doing the treatment, they're in there anyway. And so if they're going into a particular area and people are doing their plant surveys, they might say, okay, this area, it's been 5 years since the last treatment. We see red oak or red maple coming in. But we also notice Japanese knotweed, for example. That's something that we have here in Pennsylvania. They can add that to the list to selectively remove it. And yes, in those cases, you would want to selectively remove the knotweed. And you may even, if you have the ethos and the money, go in and apply it more, the herbicide more frequently than once every 5 years. Because we do know if you can knock that knotweed back and promote native plants, there can be some competition between plant communities to keep those invasives down. I am afraid, though, that in some areas that might be too expensive for someone who's managing a right of way to do. I would love it if companies had the money to go out and remove every invasive species every year, but I know they don't. But when they do manage for non-compatible trees and non-compatible vegetation, they also can be removing invasive non-native plants. And you might need to use more herbicides in those cases.
Dr. Mahan, thank you for a fantastic presentation. Great Q&A session. We had a lot more questions. We will put those, we'll send you those, Dr. Mahan, if there's anything you might want to.
Sure, I would love, yes, please really, do not be afraid to email me. My response rate is about 2 days or so, because I'm not on email as much as when I'm teaching, but I will get back to you and I can send you links to papers that provide a lot more information than even what you had today.
That is very generous. Thank you very much. We do have like 900 people on here, but
yes, great.
Thank you to all of you listening in. When I did my introductions, I left introducing my Heath Hupke with Tree Fund, who is really the backbone of this webinar series. Heath, my sincerest apologies. Thanks to Megan Fielding for being here and helping introduce the speaker today, our new trustee, and of course, our fearless leader, Paul Putman, our CEO of Tree Fund, was on here as well. So thanks to everybody for joining us. Thank you, Dr. Mahan, for being here, and look forward to having you on maybe in another few years to see how this study
Yeah.
continues
So yeah,
to
Bo,
evolve.
we should have the brown beetle work published within the year, and then we have all that butterfly data to go through. And I'm just going to make this point. A very seminal paper just came out. I think it was in Nature, that documented a 30% decline in our butterfly species. So not just monarchs. So it would be interesting to see again if these types of management approaches and rights of ways can be helpful to stem the tide of some of those declines.
Wow.
Yeah. It's
Fantastic.
kind of
Well,
exciting work.
it is. It is. And I mean, with so many right-of-ways out there, this is great work. So thank you.
Yeah.
And just a reminder to everybody on CEUs, we had a few questions come in. Remember that we will submit those for you directly to ISA. There's nothing you need to do on your end. If you have any questions, just send, I think Heath is putting his email in the chat, Tree Fund webinars at treefund.org. No, education, sorry, at treefund.org. There it is right there. So if y'all have anything, just please reach out to Heath. With that, everybody have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday, or for some of you, it's already Wednesday on the other side of the world. Thank you. And we'll be back with our next webinar in about a month. Cheers all.
Bye.